Hello Pixies, and welcome to or back to my channel. It's Zoe here, and welcome to episode 2 of Are These Books Comparable? Now, the concept for this series is that I am a reader through and through. I love books so much, and I tend to read series all in one go. I become so enamored by them that I want the same experience again, but kind of differently than the first time around. And there's so many articles and videos around online that are titled, "If you like this, read that," and things of that similar concept. But all of those articles and videos, they tend to be about books that are really popular, like A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and the likes of that. But sometimes the books that I really want to read more books like aren't necessarily the most popular. So this goes to say, if I do want to do a popular series one day, I will do it. But as of right now, I'm focusing more on books you wouldn't typically see on these kinds of lists, even if they might be popular on online spaces, but they aren't popular to the masses of the book community out in the real world. Because these books aren't as common, I want to find books like them. I discovered on Goodreads, if you scroll down, when you click on a book, there's a little segment titled Readers Also Enjoyed. So it's saying hey, if you like this book, you might like this book because other people have liked this book if they've enjoyed. And some of the things on those little tabs seem very questionable because it doesn't seem anything like the book that they are talking about. And this video, we're actually doing Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, which is what has inspired this entire series. Now, if you haven't watched episode 1, I'll link it up there because I had a really fun time with it. But in episode 1, I explained that Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, even though it wasn't the first book I did, inspired the series because a few months ago when I went to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara because I was looking for information on book 2, which came out just a few months ago, but I haven't read yet. When I was looking for information on it, I managed to find this Readers Also Enjoy tab, and on there was A Study in Drowning, which doesn't seem anything like this book. And so you're going to hear my thoughts on that in just a little bit because A Study in Drowning is in fact on this list. But let's go over what Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is about. Guardians of the Dawn Zhara by S.J. Jones, who is also the writer of Winter Song, has written an East Asian inspired fantasy book, and in this world that Zhara lives in, magicians have become kind of illegal. So people with magic have been sentenced to death. It's very harrowing, but Zhara has managed to escape this fate even though she has magic. But the reason she was able to escape this fate is that her stepmother has lied for her and said that she no longer exists. So she owes basically her entire existence to her stepmother, who is treating her rather cruelly, and she's in charge of taking care of her younger stepsister who is blind. But then one day she accidentally comes across a book detailing how to use magic, so she might be able to finally get her own magic under control, but it leads her into a plot of the Guardians of the Dawn, a secret resistance group who is going against the kingdom, because not all magic is bad, but the whole reason that magic has been outlawed in the first place is because magicians are turning into monsters which wreak mass destruction. I thought this book was really fun. I had a good time with it. Is it by any means a perfect book? No, but I think it's a really fun time. I love the mystery elements in this. I like the plot. I like that we follow two different perspectives in this book, but it's mostly our main character's perspective with little dashes of the other character. I always like that. I think it's really fun. And that is Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. And the first book in this episode is going to be Fathom Folk by Eliza Chan. And in this book, we follow a nice cast of characters who live in the city, where the city is on the ocean, and the parts that appear above the ocean are for the human people who kind of rule the city, and underneath are for the Fathom Folk, who are people of the sea, and they are treated very unwell. And two of the characters we follow in this, we follow a disgraced Fathom Folk princess who has come to live in the city with her brother, and we follow a half siren half-human character who was trying to ease the tensions between the Fathom folk and humans by getting Fathom folk more rights. This is a very political novel. There's a lot going on. Spoiler alert, I have already read this, so I don't really want to say too much right now. I want you to see like my explanation of this book and my thoughts on it in the next clip, because I'm filming this actually after the whole video. Without further ado, let's just go see my thoughts on this one, shall we? Hello and welcome to the first update. I have read a very big chunk of Fathom folk, and you know what? I'm having a really good time, but I'm struggling to see the correlation between this book and The Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. The Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is about a very magical world with a focus on magicians and how there aren't really many magicians left, and how magicians are being impacted by this magical plague, and they're trying to find the source of this plague, and there's also other mysteries all warped up in this together, and there's also like a romance and family relationships, but it's very YA. Like I would describe that book as being very YA. Well, this one, there is no doubt in my mind that this is an adult book. Not saying that like anything adult is happening. That's not what I'm saying. But this is very complicated, and this is very political. If you like a political story, I think you'd really like Fathom folk, because the politics in this, like, they're complicated, and like there's 3 different people trying to work in the ways of politics, trying to gain power, trying to make things more equal, and trying to, you know, turn the quota on its head. And the description of this book like leads you to believe that Mira and Nami are going to like work together, maybe form like a good relationship, but that's not really the case. Like their sections are mainly very, very separate, and honestly I feel like a lot of plot in this book wouldn't really happen if the characters were a little bit more sensible and just told Nami the truth right out of the gate, even though it was horrible, but just leaving her to find out on her own just seems like a really bad idea, because obviously she's going to act rationally if she doesn't have the whole picture. I am really enjoying this. It shows the complicated nature of politics, and also how we should treat others, for lack of better terms. There's a lot of discrimination in this book, and I think it handles the topic pretty well, and there are relationships, but that really takes a backseat to the things going on within the book, unlike with Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, where relationships between friends, family, and people that you're interested in take more of a forward approach, with politics happening a bit more in the background, because that story, it does have politics in it, but things get solved rather easily, honestly, in that book, other than like the mystery elements. And like, also, I wouldn't really call this book magical. Like, they call what they do as water weaving, and it's the folks like abilities like around water that people don't have, but it's never really referred to as magic. These are my thoughts so far. I still gotta finish the book, so I'll tell you what I think about comparisons between settings and characters and overall plot later. But where I stand right now, I'm really enjoying this book, but I wouldn't say it is comparable to The Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. Why hello, it is update time. I know in the last clip I talked to you all about After the Forest and how much I was looking forward to that story. I'm sorry to say, but this is not a happy update, because I actually had to DNF After the Forest. It was written in a way that I just could not get behind. I got up to chapter 8. I was on page 150 something out of 500 something, the ebook version on my cell phone, obviously the page number. depends on a multitude of factors. The print version of the book is obviously not that long, but I gave it my best shot. I was on chapter 8 of 28, and I was just making myself miserable reading it. I didn't think some things were very clear, like where characters were and where characters were in comparison to one another. We were introduced to like 3 potential love interests, even though there's nothing about her to really like, and she's basically has nothing, and this is more of a historical setting. So it's just like, why are all these men obsessed with her, even though they're all accusing her of being a witch? At the same time, it was historical in the sense that it was set in our real world, in real world history, but in a made-up place, I think. But there was like some fantasy elements, and I just gotta say, that's not really my favorite thing. I prefer, about 95% of the time, I prefer fantasy books being in a separate place than our world. I don't love a fantasy set in our world. There are exceptions to that, obviously, but for the most part, that is what I prefer. And also, if it is going to be set in the real world, I would like it to be more magical. I wasn't getting a lot of magic. Granted, I only made it to chapter 8, but I just really hated the way it was written. So I just could not continue. And I think that also goes to show that the way that is written is nothing like Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is rather simple to read. You're not really left wandering a lot of the time. And like, it's really fun and like, it's exciting. I want to know more. It's set in this fantasy world, but like very simple. Like, there's a lot of world building, yes, but it doesn't seem like the world building takes over the story, but like there's still there. You still have those elements of the world that make you be like, oh, this is a place not anything like our own, and there's just magic seeped into everything, even though magic has been illegal for quite some time. And After the Forest just did not give those vibes. I was really hoping I was going to love After the Forest, and that it was going to be this beautiful fairy tale retelling, just like Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is a fairy tale retelling. I had a lot of high hopes, but I really cannot stand behind it. I did not enjoy the story. I hate being negative about books. I really do. I want every book I read to be a new favorite. I hate talking negatively about books because I'm sure there are plenty of people who love that book and that the author worked on that book, and I don't want to diminish that as a writer myself. But I really did not enjoy the story. The story is not for me. If you're more of a historical fiction reader and maybe you want a teeny tiny splash of maybe some fantasy, maybe give it a try. But then again, I didn't really enjoy the way it was written, but that doesn't mean you won't. With that being said, I did DNF that story. Because of that, I really want to at least have 3 completed books at the minimum for this series, so I have put another book on hold from Libby. However, I do have quite a bit of a expected wait on it because I'm not the first person in line for that book. We'll see if that happens in this video or not, because I don't want to wait forever to finish it. If too much time passes, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. It's time to start the 3rd book for this video, and this is the whole reason that this series has started, and I know you've probably been waiting for it, but it is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. Now, if you don't know, Ava Reid wrote Juniper and Thorn, and that is one of my favorite books of all time. I love that story, so I've got really high hopes for A Study in Drowning, and this is the new special edition of it. It's very beautiful. This is a dark academia fantasy. In the story, we follow Effie, and Effie is an architecture student at this college, and one day this call for an architecture student goes up to, redesign the house of this very famous author who recently passed away. And this author wrote the most popular book of their time in this world, and it's also her favorite book ever, and she loves it so much. She actually wanted to study literature, but she was banned from applying to the literature college because she is a woman. So she thinks that this is her chance to go to the state and learn more from this once great author by looking at his home. But when she gets there, it's not all that it seems. It's dark, it's being flooded with water, and there is one of the students from the literature college there, and he wants to prove that the author did not actually write his most famous story and that he is in fact a fraud. And the only way to prove him wrong is to team up with him to uncover the truth. But there's some weird things going on with the air, and it's a whole mystery to be unraveled. It sounds very gothic. It sounds kind of dark. It sounds really right up my alley. But in comparison to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, I can't really say that it sounds similar. I'm really curious if this is going to be in any way similar, because to me, the vibes just don't sound right. They do both involve a specific book, so maybe there might be some correlation, but I just think the vibes are like complete opposites. Like, this is like a dark gothic story, and Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is more of a brighter world where some dark things are happening. However, I'm really excited to read this. I will tell you straight up if I just like this book or not and what I think about it, but I'll also tell you my thoughts on how similar I think it is to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. I have finished A Studying Drowning, which means it's time for another update. I really ended up enjoying this book. This book perfectly blurs the lines between reality, fiction, and storytelling, if that makes any sense, because our main character herself, she cannot really distinguish between what is real, or at least that's what we are set to believe over the course of the story, so we can never truly trust the narrator, no matter how descriptive or how honest she wants to be. And like, I thought that was really compelling. I thought the world building in this was really rich without taking over the story. There's like so much more I want to know about this world, yet nothing doesn't make sense in terms of what's happening. I loved the way it was written. I loved the story concept. I loved its gothic nature. This was like a perfect example of having like a magical setting, having a world like set deep into like magic without it being magical at all, at least on the surface. And I feel like the story was really contained into one book, so I'm really curious about what they're going to do in Ethereal Dreaming, which comes out next year. There's the first 4 chapters of Ethereal Dreaming in the back, but it doesn't really clear up all that much, honestly, on what the next book is going to entail. But I really did enjoy this book. Now, in terms of how this book is compared to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, I don't really think they're on that same spectrum. Everything is different, from writing style to characters to ambiance to literally everything. That book is more about action, and there's this slight political plot, but it's not too political because it's still for YA audience. It's supposed to be fun, and there is a romance, and sure, there's romance in here, but they're completely different. It's just a very different experience between the two books. This book is a lot darker. That one is on the lighter side with dark things that are happening. I can't really find anything that's the same. If you like strip down things to their bare essentials, you could possibly argue that they have some similar points. But at the end of the day, they're not really anything alike, because if you strip it down to those bare essentials, then so many books would fit into the category of being similar, and it's just not the truth. I don't believe this book is anything like Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. In fact, I would say books that are more like this one than anything else are Starling House, which I actually read in the first episode of this series, and also Gallant, which I compared Starling House to. I feel like these 3 books, if you like one of them, you'll like the other 2 as well. And I think that would be a lot better of a comparison. And just out of curiosity, I did go look at Goodreads at A Studying Drowning. Guardians of the Dawn Zhara is not listed underneath it. However, Starling House is. So there is a little bit of merit, I think, to what I think. And I know I mentioned in my last update that I had put another book on hold after the complete and utter failure of After the Forest. And I said that it was projecting a pretty long wait on the Libby app, but I actually ended up getting it in late last night. So I am going to read the book for this video. I have actually already started the book, and that is Of Jade and Dragons. Now, Of Jade and Dragons, we follow our main character Ying, and she's always wanted to become a part of, I think, the Engineers guild or something. However, she will never be allowed to because women are not allowed into the guild. But her father, who is a part of the guild and who went through all that training, he is a part of that guild, and so he has taught her basically all that he knows, even though that she'll never be able to actually become a part of this prestigious organization. But then when her father is murdered and she is unable to save him or capture the one who had gone after him, she decides that she's going to leave her island home and go to the capital of this island system because she is on the search for the owner of the jade pendant that she now has, that she took off the killer before he was able to get away. And in order to travel more discreetly, she has disguised herself as a boy, and she thinks that she might as well join the Engineers Guild if she is able to. And along the way, she meets one of the princes of this realm, and this prince offers to help her in her endeavors. And he also does know the truth about her, that she is in fact a girl and not a boy. I don't know if that was like a 100% great description, but it's like the best I can do at the moment. I think this book sounds really intriguing. It's described as being like a silk punk fantasy, which I think is also interesting. I don't think I've ever actually read anything that is labeled in that sort of term. I'm enjoying it so far. I don't really want to give any of my thoughts about it quite yet. This could fall into the same category as the first book we read for this video, which was Fathom Folk, of being, is it only here because it has a similar type of inspiration? But this one is YA, unlike Fathom Folk, and doesn't really seem to be as political. I'm thinking that this may be more in line with the politics side of being like Guardian of the Dawn Zhara, where there is a political background and we are dealing with people high up in the government, but it's not what the entire plot revolves around. They still have their own personal motivations and they aren't personally in the government. So we're gonna see if this one is going to be like it. I did want another fairy tale type retelling, but there wasn't anything really on there. So I guess I'll catch you when that happens. Hello Pixies, I have finished Of Jade and Dragons, which means that this is the final update of the video. Now, Of Jade and Dragons, based on the description, I had no idea what we were getting into. So there's like this political aspect to the story, but I wouldn't say it takes over the story like Fathom Folk did. Like, sure, there are politics, but since we have a main character who is not involved in those politics for the most part, and who is maybe a little bit naive on how things work, it doesn't take over the story, and we have her own storyline and her revenge storyline. And we also have this forbidden romance aspect to the story. It actually did remind me of Guardians of the Dawn Zhara because of these aspects of having, yes, it's YA and it feels YA. They're both fun, they're both adventurous, there's always something happening. There never seems to be a slow moment because there's so much going on that there's not really time to slow down and have a calm moment. Not saying that that doesn't happen. Obviously, this book takes place over the course of months, but every second on the page there's something happening. It never really seems like we're meandering or focusing too much on aesthetics or this, that, and the other, because it's focused on this very plot-driven story, but it's a plot-driven story driven by the character's needs and desires. So it's still character-driven while being plot-driven. The main characters are kind of similar to each other. They both kind of have to hide who they are, fall in love with someone that they shouldn't. They both make bad decisions. They're both kind of impulsive and make choices that aren't necessarily good for themselves. But I feel like Of Jade and Dragons actually does a bit better job with characters than Guardian of the Dawn Zhara. And don't get me wrong, I love Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. Like, I really enjoyed myself during that book. But I think the characterization in Of Jade and Dragons has similar characters with similar character traits, but they feel a bit more fleshed out. They make even worse decisions compared to the characters in Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. I really enjoyed Of Jade and Dragons, and I think it is a great book to read if you really enjoyed Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. And if you have read Of Jade and Dragons, then I would highly actually recommend Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. However, I do want to point out this little thing that makes me a little bit hesitant, and that is how this book is defined. This book is marketed as fantasy. When you read the description, it says it is fantasy with silk punk accents. And to be honest, I didn't know what silk punk was, so I went and looked it up, and it is very similar to steampunk, but instead features Eastern philosophy and art and materials, which made complete and utter sense, and that is definitely what this story is. However, I define fantasy as having magical elements, whether it is people with powers, magical creatures, magical world, or magical plot lines. I believe these things are what make up fantasy. And Of Jade and Dragons does not have any of those aspects. There isn't anything in there that I can describe as magical, and I think that is the key factor of fantasy, and it has none of that. So I don't really understand why this is labeled as fantasy instead of being science fiction in a silk punk way. I don't necessarily think sci-fi means it has to be a futuristic setting with super advanced technology. This is more of a historical sci-fi, if that makes sense, because of those silk punk aspects and the lack of magic. Because of the lack of magic, if you really love magical plot lines and you liked the magical aspects of Guardians of the Dawn Zhara and the whole mystery of what has happened to magic and what happens to the magicians and why all this is going down because of magic, you're not going to find that in Of Jade and Dragons. But I still think the book was really good. It was really enticing. It was really clever. Those are my thoughts of On Jade and Dragons and how it compares to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara. So we'll just do a quick little recap. The first book I read, Fathom Folk. I believe you'll like Fathom Folk if you liked Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, but you didn't love it and you want more of a political fantasy novel where the focus isn't really on the magic but still integral to things that happen in the continuation of the series. However, I can't necessarily recommend it if you absolutely loved Guardians of the Dawn Zhara and you want to find something else like it. Next up was the book that I DNF'd, which was After the Forest. There are no similarities, in my opinion, other than they're both fairy tale retellings. From the writing style, to the characters, to the plot, to basically everything, I can't in good conscience recommend this book at all. And then was A Study in Drowning, which is the whole reason this series exists in the first place. This book was a fantastic gothic fantasy that was maybe a little bit quieter in terms of plot compared to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, and a heck of a lot darker. I can't say that this book is comparable to Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, really, unless you boil things down to their most basic elements, but if you do that, then a lot of books could fall into those categories, so I can't really recommend it if you love that, but I think it's still a fantastic book and is one of my favorite books that I read in this video. And lastly, Of Jade and Dragons. I believe if you loved Guardians of the Dawn Zhara, then you'll love Of Jade and Dragons if you are expecting it to not have any magic in it. So those were my final thoughts for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I am so glad that I read Of Jade and Dragons because it wasn't in the plan, but I am so glad that it happened and I would like to read more books on it, and I'm also now really excited for the next books in the series. If you've read any of these books, leave your thoughts on them down below. I would love to hear about it. If you agree or disagree on any of these points, I would also love to know. And if you have any recommendations for if you loved any of these books for the people who watch this video, you can also leave that down there. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I would really appreciate it. And subscribe if you want to see more content. I will be posting a lot in December, and I hope to see you there. So I guess I'm signing off now. Okay, bye.